Thank you, Chairman Warren and Ranking Member Van Hollen. Thanks for holding this hearing. Welcome, General Bondi.
Thank you, Senator.
Good to see you. I want to raise with you something that's been deeply concerning to me, General Bondi. The 2024 Democrat nominee for Vice President actually called federal immigration agents Donald Trump's modern-day Gestapo. This is dangerous for our agents, it's wrong, and it cuts against and it undercuts the rule of law. So I want to ask you a series of questions, General Bondi, and if you would accommodate me, I would appreciate it. First, you'll agree when a bill is passed by Congress and signed by the President, it's law, right?
Yes, Senator.
And until that law is changed by Congress, you have a duty to follow it, right? That's what the rule of law is.
Yes, Senator.
Something unprecedented just erupted inside the federal judiciary, and almost nobody outside that courtroom understands how massive this is yet. Two rulings dropped almost back to back, and together they form one of the most devastating legal rebukes ever delivered to a sitting Attorney General. If you've been following the quiet tension building around Attorney General Pam Bondi's Justice Department, what just surfaced doesn't simply confirm the rumors. It blows them wide open. Because the judges involved didn't hold back, didn't soften their language, and didn't leave any space for interpretation. They went straight to the foundation of the cases Bondi brought, tore apart the legal structure brick by brick, and in the process exposed a level of dysfunction and possibly misconduct that will be studied for years. But none of that was obvious from the outside. Courtrooms tend to look calm, controlled, routine. Yet the moment these rulings were read, something shifted. Attorneys stopped writing. Reporters locked their eyes on the bench. Even Bondi's own team showed flickers of confusion, because what was being described wasn't a standard dismissal or a disagreement over legal interpretation. It was something far more serious, a collapse of prosecutorial legitimacy at the structural level. Judges don't issue findings like this unless something has gone terribly wrong behind the scenes. The first blow came from Senior Judge Cameron Curry, a figure known for choosing words with surgical precision. His ruling didn't just critique Bondi's approach, it detonated the entire legal basis of the prosecutions against James Comey and Letitia James by exposing something no one outside Bondi's inner circle seemed aware of. The appointment of interim U.S. Attorney Lindsay Halligan had been unlawful from the very moment she stepped into the role. Not questionable, not debatable, unlawful. To understand the gravity of that, you need to consider what it means for a federal prosecutor to lack lawful authority. The statutes governing interim appointments are rigid for a reason. These individuals wield extraordinary power, the ability to pursue charges, convene grand juries, seek indictments, and make decisions that can alter the course of someone's life forever. Federal law requires transparency, oversight, and clear process exactly because the stakes are so high. The law is built around the assumption that those in these roles must be selected properly, confirmed properly, and empowered properly. Judge Curry found that none of those requirements had been followed, which means every indictment Halligan signed, every witness she approved, every filing she submitted, every prosecutorial decision she authorized, each one was executed under authority she did not legally possess. Observers reviewing the ruling described it as institutional freefall, because when the foundation of a prosecution is void, everything built on top of it collapses instantly. The judge wrote that the indictments against Comey and James could not proceed because they originated from an unlawful exercise of executive power. That phrasing alone signals the seriousness of the issue. This wasn't weak evidence. This wasn't a technical correction. It was a judicial declaration that the federal government had pursued high-profile prosecutions without meeting the most basic threshold of legal legitimacy. And as soon as that ruling hit the docket, the second blow landed. Magistrate Judge William Fitzpatrick released his findings on the grand jury process in the Comey case. His language was stunning, a disturbing pattern of profound investigative missteps. Now, judges rarely use emotionally charged phrasing in formal opinions. They know these rulings become historical records. So when a judge uses words like disturbing and profound, it means something serious has taken place. He found that prosecutors had presented misstatements of law to grand jurors, ordinary citizens who rely entirely on prosecutors to explain the governing legal framework. Grand jurors aren't there to debate legal standards. They're there to determine whether evidence meets those standards. If the law is misrepresented, the entire proceeding becomes corrupted. According to the ruling, that's exactly what happened. But that wasn't the only problem. Judge Fitzpatrick also found that potentially privileged material had been shown to the grand jury. Privilege exists because justice requires protected communication. When prosecutors place privileged information in front of grand jurors, they create bias that cannot be undone. Decisions get influenced by information the law says they should never have seen in the first place. And then came the most bewildering part of all. Evidence that the indictment process was so chaotic, no one could say with certainty whether the grand jury had even reviewed or approved the final indictment filed against Comey. Think about that. At the highest level of federal criminal law, where procedures are supposed to be airtight, there were missing steps so fundamental that the indictment may not have been properly authorized at all. This wasn't a single mistake. It was a chain of failures, each one compounding the last. But the moment everything shifted was when new information emerged about the courthouse security footage. After Judge Fitzpatrick issued an order requiring all evidence in the case to be preserved, surveillance cameras reportedly captured Attorney General Bondi leaving the courthouse with boxes of documents. Not boxes of personal items. Boxes that investigators believed were tied to the prosecutions themselves. Critics are raising questions because investigators later noted that case materials expected in those boxes could not be located in DOJ archives. The timeline is extraordinarily tight. The judge signs the preservation order, Bondi exits the building with the boxes, and the files later appear to be missing. No one is claiming intent, but the sequence alone has pushed observers into stunned disbelief, because at the center of this timeline is the nation's chief law enforcement officer. There's a reason this moment is hitting the Justice Department so hard. Prosecutors routinely bring charges against defendants accused of obstructing justice or mishandling evidence after judicial orders. Those kinds of cases get pursued aggressively. And now analysts are openly saying that if the footage is authenticated, it raises serious questions about why the Attorney General would remove physical evidence at such a critical moment. Defense attorneys across the country have taken immediate notice. For years, DOJ prosecutors have relied on credibility and procedural rigor when presenting cases. Now those same defense attorneys will argue that the country's top law enforcement official failed to uphold those standards herself. That kind of credibility fracture ripples across the entire legal system. And that brings us to the political ramifications, because these prosecutions weren't random. They targeted two of the most visible individuals ever to clash with Donald Trump. James Comey, the former FBI director who oversaw the early stages of the Russia investigation, and Letitia James, the New York Attorney General who pursued Trump's business empire in court. These prosecutions were widely seen as attempts to deliver Trump the legal vengeance he'd been discussing for years. Instead, the fallout has achieved the exact opposite outcome. Comey and James now walk away with rulings that don't just dismiss the charges, they document that the prosecutions themselves were built improperly from the ground up. They can now cite federal judicial findings that the cases against them were rooted in unlawful authority, misrepresented legal standards, improper evidence handling, and procedural breakdowns at the most basic level. For Trump's inner circle, this is a disastrous turn. Observers who initially believed these prosecutions would serve as symbolic victories for the administration are now watching them collapse in spectacular fashion. Some analysts suggest that the strategy behind these cases may have been driven more by political messaging than legal strength. But whatever the motivation, the outcome is now a matter of public record, and the shadow over Bondi's leadership extends beyond these cases. She is also deeply involved in the handling of the Epstein files, a matter already fraught with public suspicion, speculation, and decades of unanswered questions. Critics are now raising concerns that procedural failures in one arena could cast doubt over her actions in others. If public trust erodes in the integrity of her office, even routine decisions may face backlash. The consequences are spreading quickly. Congressional oversight committees are preparing inquiries. Inspector General reviews are likely being drafted. Bar associations in multiple states may assess whether Bondi's conduct, if confirmed, violates ethical obligations. Future prosecutors, judges, and lawmakers will all be operating under the shadow of these findings. Because once credibility collapses in the nation's top law enforcement office, every subsequent action gets viewed through that lens. That's why this moment matters. For some, the story is about political overreach. For others, it's about systemic failure inside the Justice Department. And for a growing number of analysts, it's about the irreversible consequences of weaponizing legal power without procedural discipline. Whatever interpretation viewers walk away with, the rulings make one thing clear. The fallout is only beginning, and the path ahead for Bondi's Justice Department is steep, uncertain, and filled with scrutiny from every direction. If you made it to the end of this breakdown, let me know in the comments. You're the kind of viewer who actually cares about how power works behind the scenes. And if you want more deep reporting like this, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us. Because if the first two rulings were this explosive, what comes next could reshape the entire landscape of federal law enforcement.